Hey everybody, welcome to Rev'd Up for Sunday. I am over Rev'd, and we are 2 out of the 3 clergy from St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut. I'm Peter Walsh.
I'm John Kennedy.
And Reverend Elizabeth will be back soon. So today we have perhaps the most difficult parable to interpret in the New Testament. I would say perhaps also the only parable I ever put hours into, and when I got done, I knew less than I started. So, hang on, everybody. Here we go. This is the parable of the unjust steward, or the parable of the dishonest manager, or the parable of the foolish master, and some appended sayings. We're in Luke 16, 1-13. Jesus said to his disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him, and he said to him, 'What is this that I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer.' Then the manager said to himself, 'What will I do? Now that my master is taking the position away from me, I am not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do, so that when I am dismissed as a manager, people may welcome me into their homes.' So summoning his master's debtors one by one, he asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil.' He said to him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 50. Then he asked another, 'How much do you owe?' He replied, 100 containers of wheat. And he said to him, 'Take your bill, and make it 80. And his master commended the dishonest manager, because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in very little is faithful also in much, and whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest also in much. If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust you with the true riches? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve 2 masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." Okay, John, so as I said in my preamble, all the work I did, and maybe I was more confused, more knowledgeable, but maybe more confused, and I rolled out the unjust steward, the dishonest manager, or the foolish master, and the appended sayings. There's a lot to say here, but I want to have a word from you, and then I'd like to propose some solutions to the parable.
Sure. Well, given that you're proposing some solutions, I don't want to preempt that, but it was very funny for me to hear you say that after hours with the parable, you felt like you knew less at the end. Maybe that's how I should feel, but at this moment, at the beginning of this conversation, I actually feel like it makes sense. Yeah. So I don't know how we want to get to all of that, but that's how I'm feeling right now.
I'm really psyched about this because, as you can tell, we do not rehearse these conversations here. And everything that I'm going to roll out, it comes from scholars. This is way beyond the pay grade of people like you and me, parish priests. And so just to set the context here, folks, it is clear that Jesus said something like all the things that are in the parable and the appended sayings. Scholars also would agree that it is clear that Luke modified a bunch of these things, and so we're getting something of Luke's take. And it also seems clear that Luke, and even perhaps the tradition before Luke put it all down on paper, experienced as much difficulty in understanding the parable as we do now all these years later. There's, this is a parable that, continues to intrigue and mystify us and show up in our lectionaries, and yet there is no agreed upon solution. Mm-hmm. So with that said, let me roll out the first solution, and then we'll talk about this as we go through and talk about some of the issues with each of these things. And so, as you know, John, the basic problem here is how can Jesus commend the apparent dishonesty and trickery of this steward? How can that be? And so the standard interpretation for this, and so this goes down as number one, is to focus on the prudence or the shrewdness of the steward and argue that the master praises this while overlooking the steward's dishonesty. So this is where you get the view of this as the shrewd steward, and that we as Christians are to be equally prudent without being dishonest. That's the kind of way that I think it's most preached upon.
Yes. Yeah. And I would say that still leaves a major unresolved element, which is how is this master, this rich man, okay in any universe with being apparently cheated out of money, right? Because we have the manager who's about to get fired, calling in the master's debtors, who he's of course been dealing with on the master's behalf, and saying, how much do you owe my master? 100 jugs of oil. Well, take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 50.
Quickly
is an interesting detail here, given what I'm about to say, which is this is commonly resolved, this major tension and seeming dissonance with reference to basically the business practices of the time, where a manager who is lending, goods in this case to whoever it may be on behalf of their master. And just a little side note to say that this manager was probably a slave given significant responsibilities, likely anyway. That would be one very common arrangement.
Mm-hmm. Right.
In any case, the manager would be entitled to a commission.
That's how he was paid.
Yes,
yeah.
Off of the lending. So in addition to whatever would be paid back directly to the master, the manager would also get a little bit of interest back. And what he seems to be doing here, and according to this interpretation, is just canceling his commission. In this case, then, the master wouldn't actually be losing anything.
Right. Okay. Excellent. And
that's not in the text at all.
No. But this is great.
It's
Yeah. This is great because you're starting to bring into how do we interpret this thing, and so we don't have this mechanism in our world now, so we have to plunge into first century antiquity here to try to understand the context of this, to understand the meaning of it. And so I think some of the things that get pointed out with that sort of solution is how is it that that he's making these deals so that other people will welcome into their houses, but would they really welcome a guy who was either a mismanager because he got into a place that wasn't so good, or would they welcome a guy who was potentially dishonest? And you're saying, no, just the opposite to that, which is he's actually facing a difficult situation, and he's not taking his cut, and therefore all is good in Mudville, and of course they would take him. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So there's one way to look at this thing. Okay. On to the second solution, and I'll say again that these solutions don't come from me; they come from a man named John Donahue. I think he's a Jesuit biblical scholar. In a book he wrote called Gospel as Parable or something like that, a book I got when I was in seminary. Okay, here's the second solution. This is a solution in terms of economic background. The steward is not dishonest. What this is about is Old Testament prohibitions against lending money at interest, and the steward takes care of difficult business around the law. That's why they would give this to the steward, because the owner would not want to have anything to do with this. So it gets handed off to a person who can take the hit, so to speak. And the manager simply reduces the loan to its real amount. minus the interest. This is not unlike what you were saying about, but the question is, whose interest is it? Is it the steward's or is it the master's? And by doing so, he hopes debtors will see him as resourceful and ready to sacrifice his own gain when caught in a difficult situation. Such a person they might welcome into their homes. Now, Fitzmyer, a great commentator of a day gone by, adds that the point of the parable is when faced with a crisis of the kingdom proclaimed by Jesus, we are summoned to decisive action and to forsake our own advantage. That's what the parable's about.
Yeah.
So that's not unlike what you were saying
No.
previously, a kind of look at that.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Okay, here's number 3, a solution in terms of literary criticism. And here's where it really starts to rock and roll. This is by a guy named Dan Ovia. And more than any other, this parable has captured the imagination of commentators, according to John Donahue. And this is a comic parable. The character caught in a difficult situation emerges successful, but with a twist. The steward is a roguish character who lives by his wits, often on the fringes of society. He's not immoral, he's amoral. And it is to be a counter to the over-seriousness of life. The steward is a model for those who must accept the full human dilemma of surviving amid ambiguous situation and not collapsing when faced with destruction. The steward is to provide comic relief from the dead seriousness of Jesus' teaching, and a happy outcome of the story hints that our well-being does not rest on our dead seriousness.
Interesting. Have to, put that in my pipe. And
You ever hear anything like that before?
no, I mean, I've heard that general approach to biblical interpretation applied to other passages, but not to this particular
Okay,
passage.
so that's the comic interpretation.
Yeah. I mean, I do like that levity and humor and irony and all of that would be in the Gospels and in Jesus' teaching, and sort of an embrace of a trickster type characters,
trickster.
which is one of the great sort of mythological archetypes according to Jung and Joseph Campbell and people like that. Jacob in Genesis would be a prime trickster.
Oh yeah. That's good, John.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you bringing that. And we can just also say that Luke seems to really kind of like roguish characters. I mean, even the prodigal son.
Right.
We have other stories where we have these guys who are kind of off the trail, really are on the trail. Just at Jesus' crucifixion.
Yeah.
The good thief next to him on the cross.
Yeah.
You get the redemption of these people
That's
who
right.
are not. These are not square cut Boy Scout type people.
Yes. And Jesus's prime antagonists are the square cut Boy Scout type people. No offense to the Boy Scouts in our audience and in our community.
Good call.
But just, everything by the book, following the rules, and sort of equating goodness, virtue, the good life with that. Jesus has major difficulties with people who approach life that way. And given that, it's not all that surprising that he and or Luke is deploying characters in these parables who really cut against that.
I think this is particularly important.
Rigidity.
Important for people to get a hold of, because a lot of times, I mean, particularly kids, or maybe the kiddom that I had, you could grow up thinking that the purpose of religion is to be good.
Right.
And it's not true. And I know, I mean, if you take a look at the genealogies in the Hebrew scriptures, they're peppered with characters that don't fit the bill, so to speak. And, they're the key connectors.
Yes, very important.
Yeah. Okay, let's keep going here.
Sure.
And thanks everybody for hanging in as we go through. I got another kind of wild one here for you. Okay,
Let's hear it.
This is the number 4 one. This is from Folklore, and this comes from a guy named Bernard Brandon Cott. And the folklore take on this is the big deal is we have a crafty steward who gets crafted into being a hero of decisive action. And this does not think of this as a model of virtue. The master acted unjustly toward the steward, and the steward is getting even. The hearers identify with the roguish steward. The steward is the victim of the rich man's injustice. The rich man is the victim of the steward's cleverness. And Jesus uses this folklore motif and provides a counter world to readers' expectations. Normal world of power and justice should go together, but the rich man exercises power without justice, and the steward exercises the power of a victim. And this is a quotation. By so upsetting this world, the parable functions so that the reader in the world of the kingdom must establish new coordinates for power, vulnerability, and justice.
Interesting. Yeah. You know, I'm not terribly persuaded by that. I appreciate the values and the concerns it addresses. Power being possessed by the unjust, wielded unjustly and exploitively against people without power. But I don't think that quite fits the parable. I mean, just call me, square and boring in how I read Jesus's parables, but by and large, I see, when there is a ruler or a king or a rich man, and it's a matter of his dealings with his subordinates. It's God and God's people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that fits here too.
Okay, so we're coming to the fifth one.
Okay, number five.
Number
Wow.
5.
Wow.
Yeah. And this is one that I find this one very compelling. If I had to choose one,
Wow.
which I probably will since I'm the preacher, this is the one I find most compelling.
Okay, good.
And this is the solution in terms of the Lucan context. So this is Luke's understanding.
Right.
And,
That's yeah.
And so, whatever the original is, Luke rewrote it. So we're getting Luke's take on Jesus here in this, and that the context is the similarity with the previous parable, which is the parable of the prodigal son, or the parable of the prodigal father. Right. And so this is really the parable of the foolish master. I know, isn't that cool?
Yes.
And so the parable of the foolish master, the surprise and shock come not with the completion of the successful steward's plan, but with the master's praise. It's the master's praise that's the big deal in this story. And the master is, unconcerned about the deal making in the way the prodigal father is unconcerned about the prodigal son, whatever he did with the money. So the father and the master are God in the story here. And God does not extract punishment, but gives time and cancels debts, even in the midst of human machinations. And so Luke may use this to counter fear and anxiety.
Yes. Yeah, I like that. I mean, I don't know if, I just haven't had enough time to sit with it. I don't know if I would sign off on every feature of that interpretation, nor do I presume to really be the authority on whether it's a good interpretation. But I like what's going on in the big picture. And I really think that in Luke and in Acts, I mean, the Lucan narrative, it's really inviting us into this much more relaxed, trusting relationship to God and therefore to life. Yeah. And to not worry. I mean, Jesus says, do not worry, right? I think this fits that.
Well, we
nicely.
of course, we get the don't worry from the consider lilies in the field passage, which is both in Luke and Matthew. Yeah. We also get it in Three Little Birds from Bob Marley. That's right. Back to your Bob Marley expertise here. I think that I think it's interesting to take a look at the challenges that we have sometimes with dealing with our scriptures, and that in interpreting them. I mean, as you know, I'm as I mentioned, I'm most clear about this, or like this the most. And then we have the appended sayings, which are not so clear either. And so in the appended sayings that Luke has put on this, we get the question of this it certainly is in light of what we just came, but it cannot be the only interpretive lens, because you can't serve God and mammon, that kind of finish up. But the truth is that the steward does serve God and mammon, so he gets praise from the earthly steward, and because it's a parable, it has to do with the godly steward. So he actually does serve God and mammon here. So it's a little confusing to kind of just fit all the pieces together nicely in a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah, indeed. And clearly these are sayings that have been sort of gathered together by Luke. Yeah. He sees them as related to the parable and related to each other, but it's not like Jesus told the parable and then said this and then said this and then said this. But maybe I should just say sort of how I look at all
Yeah,
of this
yeah.
as
I was going to say,
whole.
you know,
Yeah.
since I've laid this out and I've forced you into a certain kind of respond to this, respond to that, respond to this, respond. You know, just tell us what you think.
Right, right. Well, one of the major themes in this parable, and of course in the teachings that follow, is very clearly money, wealth. And that is also a very major theme in Jesus' teachings generally, in particular how they are presented in Luke's gospel. Luke, more than any other gospel, I think is fair to say, voices the strongest skepticism about abundant wealth. Most clearly articulates the conviction that it tends to corrupt and that it tends to compromise and very often sever our relationship to God and our right relationships to one another. And I think this fits right in with that in a sort of roundabout way. I mean, it's an interesting story to make the point, but I kind of see the point being made, especially if you accept the detail that what the manager is doing is canceling his own commission, not cheating the master. If you go with that for a moment, it kind of looks like what the manager is doing is prioritizing his relationships with other people, his connections to other people, foregoing his own advantage, his own financial advantage here. And Jesus seems to be saying something to the effect here that if you let go of your concern for your own wealth and your own advantage along those lines, and you instead prioritize harmonious relationships with one another, this will serve you well in this age and in the age to come. And this isn't sort of like a legalistic ledger sort of thing, a tit for tat sort of, heavenly reward or earthly reward for this good behavior. I mean, you can look at it that way, and ultimately it might play out that way. But I think more immediately and more fundamentally, it's that if you live this way, you will be in the flow of the Spirit. Luke's all about receiving the Spirit, right? Living in the Spirit by the power of the Spirit. You will be in the divine flow, and this matters much more than having money and looking out for your own interest. And I mean, there's a lot more to say, but just one little connection to another parable is the rich man and Lazarus,
right,
which is also in this chapter, Luke chapter 16. And what happens in that story is we have this rich man who's so preoccupied with his own wealth that he doesn't have any sensitivity, doesn't pay any attention at all to this poor man outside his gate. And then when they're in heaven, or the eternal homes, right, I think is a good way of reading that little detail or that phrase in this parable. The tables are turned, and Lazarus is consoled and exalted, and the rich man is brought low to Hades, right? And I think Jesus is saying, both in this age and in the age to come, if you're generous, I think it's kind of about generosity, living in this open-handed, open-hearted way, as I've grown fond of saying. There's something to the effect that, like, the community of the, you could call the saints in heaven, the people of heaven, they will receive you too, and somehow all of that matters. How well we love one another has a lot to do with our eternal status.
Yeah, thank you for that. I agree with you.
Okay.
I agree with you. I know I laid out the paradigms, which were sort of challenging for me because there was so much new ways to think in that for me. But I'm with you on that. I'd also think that the way the parable works, there's a lot of different things that you might pull out of it, and I think you've pulled out things that are consonant with the way Luke sees things, and that two things. I think part of this is, as you pointed out, Luke says more about wealth and poverty than any of the other gospelers. He doesn't talk much about money. He talks about wealth and poverty and keeps these two really together. He's not telling you how to manage your money, so to speak. And then the question here, I think, has a lot to do with ambiguity. In my opinion, this has living and making sense out of the ambiguities of our lives, and that calls for a certain amount of shrewdness. And that a part of that shrewdness is that we take seriously, the whole idea that the way we contend with our money has to do with, kind of paying it forward, for lack of another phrase. Yeah. So the way you use your money, you can make deposits in the heavens, so to speak.
Right.
By using your money to serve others, and that's something to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
And that is the thing. And I do love that phrase, to be welcome into the eternal homes. I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
And then he has that insight also where, the whole sentence, for the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And, a lot of sermons have been based on that also, where people say, take a look at this. We're too passive or something like that. Mm-hmm. In our approach to things.
Yeah. Indeed. Yeah. So much more we could say. Unfortunately, we don't really have time.
Yeah.
One last little detail I do want to surface here is the phrase dishonest wealth is more literally in the Greek, mammon of iniquity. Mammon of iniquity. And we're familiar with mammon, most of us, to the degree that we are familiar with it from earlier translations, English translations of the Gospels, which have Jesus' teaching here and its parallel in Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount, as you cannot serve God and mammon.
Right.
And mammon is a Greek transliteration of a Hebrew or Aramaic word, usually explained as meaning that in which one trusts, which is why I wanted to bring that up.
Nice,
I think this
John.
parable is has to do with what or who we put our trust in.
Yeah. Okay, that's the final word. That's a great final word. I really appreciate everybody hanging in there, and I hope I haven't confused you with the 5 paradigms. And just to open that up. And John, I really appreciate the way you took the threads that I broke apart and brought them all back together. What a great gift to us all you have been today. Thank you for that. And the last line about mammon, really, really good. Okay, everybody. Well, God bless you. We love it when you follow us all the way through and you contribute back and are thankful to the grace that you show us. So peace be with you. God bless you and take care. Talk to you again if you tune in.